Hey, buddy. What to say?
Oh, look, I'm not going to say it right now. Okay, the moment's passed. However, I'm kind of curious as to because I feel like we've been talking about like racial slurs as if they're like magical, basically, and that they operate like in ways that other words don't. Because there are other like insults or epithets, I think is the right word, that people use interchangeably, right? So if you were going to go to like a Hispanic area, like Los Angeles, for example, where I grew up, you'd hear people saying like "que onda va?" I'm sorry, "que onda way," right? And this just means like, what's up, man? Right? Like there's no like insult there, but way or way, whatever the fuck you want to say, actually is like that's like a word for like idiot, stupid. It literally means like a castrated bull, right? So if so outside of that context, right, of people colloquially using it like within friend groups to just say, hey man, right, it's not really taken as an insult, right? Just like dog isn't, right, in that area, right? It's not. You can call somebody a dog to insult them, but in this cultural context, it's not an insult when you say that somebody's your dog, right? So like I feel like racial slurs, quote unquote, operate the same way. The N-word operates the same way. And some context good, some context bad. It really just depends on the culture.
Okay, so let me educate you real quick, Doobie, on the word. When you said "que on the way,"
look, I don't speak gutter speech. Okay,
hold on a minute. I'm trying to help you out here. So when you say "que on the way," that doesn't mean I'm giving some slur to somebody. Okay, it just really means "what's up, clown? What's up, silly? What's up, goofy?" Like that. That's what it means. Even though the English translation of the word means the castration of the balls, but that's not how we're saying it, and that's not what it means. So I mean, even for the, it's not even on a variant level or the same variant level as the N-word at all. It's not even close. It's not even near it.
Wait, hold on, but it is, right? So it's a word that means one thing, actually, if you were to translate it directly, but the way that it's being used is not in that way, right? That's exactly the point that I was making.
Yeah, but it's not discriminating against somebody's skin color, nationality, or
I didn't say it's a racial slur. It's just like an insult, right? But the way that people use it is not an insult.
So the only things,
but it's not a
connotation or insult.
No, if you said like, if you called me the S word for my slur for being Hispanic, we don't use that against each other. Like if I call another Latino the same that slur word, I don't call another Hispanic that. Now I've been called it by variation of other nationalities and races, but I've never ever been called by my own. But that's what I think what Kai was relating to, that the N word is universal, known that it's bad, it's hard, it's harsh.
What about the word fuck or fucker? Right, so you can say this fucking guy, I mean like your friend, this or this fuck, and you can mean that the person's your friend, or you can say this fuck and mean that they're like a shit person, right? Like that word has like many meanings depending on the context.
Was it fundamentally?
No, hold on. I understand it's not
racial.
I understand that it's not a racial slur. It's just like typically an insult, but not always used as an insult, right?
I understand that the word has been utilitarianism into everything that could be. I can call my remote control in my house that word, like when I'm looking for it. It can be used for anything at this point. No other racial slur is used in this way. If you can show me something like that, I'll concede.
But this, all I'm saying is this racial slur, the N-word, right, in that context is being used in the same way that lots of other words are used, right? It's not magical. Right? So words are used in ways that are specific to the context of the culture, et cetera, that they're being used in. Right? And that's all I'm saying. And I think you agree with me.
I entirely understand that, and I agree with it, but I'm saying that the N-word is the only word that's been used in literature before another person's first name.
I don't know if that's true. But
in
let's
Tom
say
Sawyer,
let's
in
say
Tom
let's say I grant
Sawyer,
it to you.
there was
Hold
a
on,
character called N-word Jim.
That's funny. But let's say I grant that to you, right? That this is like a special racial slur that has more power than any other racial slur. Sure, I
No,
can
it
grant
doesn't.
that to you. Oh, hold on. I can. But even if I were to say that, right? I were to say that's the case. It doesn't mean that racial slur can't be used in ways that aren't like racially driven or have like or aren't friendly or etc. Right? Just as in the example I gave of like an Asian person saying it to a white person when they've grown up in an area with a culture where that word is said in ways that aren't like have no like racial connotation. So I think I just think you're treating the N-word as if it's like a special magical word that doesn't have all the rules.
Magically, you're saying all racial slurs should be used, or no racial slurs should be used.
Well, no, I think racial slurs
Is there
should
any
be
racial
used
slur
when
you
there's a good reason to
condone?
use it. All
Is
of
there
them.
a racial slur you condone?
Yeah,
all
I think
racial
it's
slurs?
fine to use racial slurs in like the proper context. So I'll give you an example.
No. Whoa.
I'll give you an example.
I'm not saying
I'll
proper
give-
context. I'm saying in common language, because the N-word is used in common language. So I'm saying, should
I
normal
disagree.
racial slurs? What?
Yeah. So when I think again, you're conflating the two words. So when I say the N-word is used like colloquially to mean like buddy and friend, I'm talking about like with the A, right? And you're treating it as the same as like the hard R N-word, which I don't think is used that way. Right. So I think you're just treating it. I understand, but you're treating them as the same word, and I don't think most people see them that way.
It doesn't matter if they see it that way. That's ignorance on their part. The word comes.
But you're the
from a
one.
particular root.
You're the odd man out using it and using these words in a way that people within that culture don't use them.
I'm saying each word has its etymology and the reason why it's used. If it has been diluted over time because of common usage, doesn't matter to me.
But
The
that's
word
part
still
of the
means what it
etymology.
means.
But that would be
Like
all words, Kai. All words have like a
Yeah.
different
And I
etymology than the way
agree
we
with
currently
that.
use them.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But what word has come down to dilution to the point where a racial slur becomes common parlance?
Sycophant. The term sycophant would be an example, right? The original term sycophant had to do with figs. Now it has nothing to do with figs. The etymology is wildly different than it used to be.
And how often do you use sycophant in common parlance with your friends?
I think that people use sycophant pretty frequently. I don't think that they use it like when they're talking with their friends, but they use it in academic context, or political context.
Or
Yeah.
even socially. I mean, if somebody's, kissing up, they're a sycophant. For
No.
sure.
Very rarely used.
First time I ever heard that word.
Yeah, I mean,
Let's just use
I
it.
heard it
I know
used.
the word quite commonly.
Like, especially in politics, if you have somebody there's a lot of sycophants surrounding Donald Trump. And if you're having a conversation about the White House during those years, you're going to hear that word a lot.
So I want to let in some of the people who just showed up. First of all, Nick's been here a while, hasn't had a chance to speak. So hello, Nick. I'm gonna let you jump in if you'd like.
Eventually, I just like this conversation, but yes, hi everybody.
Okay.
Hope you're all doing well, by the way.
Yeah, we absolutely are. Thank you so much. Synth is here, and Phenomenics, who we both had them on previously. We had I'm not sure if it was fun. It was a conversation. It was a laborious conversation.
That's fair.
On morals, but I do appreciate both of you stopping by again. Thank you so much. If you want to jump in and say anything, we'd love to hear your opinions.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for having me on again, Prime. I know we got heated in our last conversation, but I kind of like
fine.
you. I think Prime's a cool guy. I think that Kai is correct. I think that the N-word is the only word that we use in a utilitarian way. I think that we don't pay attention to the
That was my point.
We don't pay attention to the consequences of any other word. The consequences never matter. If there was like a nuclear bomb that was going to go off and you had to say the N-word, we shouldn't do it. Nobody should say the N-word. The N-word's always bad. I'm not being sarcastic.
Yeah, that's very cringe.
You agree with that? No, I guess not. All right. Synth, how serious are you actually? You're not.
I'm not. I was being extremely sarcastic.
Okay,
I think that's a ridiculous position.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Okay, thank you so much. I wasn't sure. Phenomenics, please.
Sure. It seems like we have pretty good evidence that reclaimed slurs don't have a significant impact on like mental health or anything like that. Non-reclaimed slurs don't. There seems to be like a very different effect of like the use of the hard R versus the soft R, the soft A, but the soft A seems to have like basically no negative effects.
No negative effects.
According to like research.
Okay.
Nerd.
So are you saying that within like within a black community saying that doesn't have negative effects, and then you're also saying that it doesn't maybe have any sort of benefit in terms of if this is used by someone else in any malicious way, simply reclaiming it doesn't preclude us from feeling terrible?
Yeah, basically. Well, sorry. Reclaiming the slur seems to have like, I'm sure it's going to vary based on like the level of reclamation, but specifically the soft A N-word seems to have like no statistical impact on like mental health or anything like that, as opposed to like we do see like major effects on mental health for like Ukrainians immigrating into Poland. We have like really good evidence that using racial slurs against these people has like massive effects on mental health.
LJ Steele, thank you for the 8 months. Visa, much appreciated, LJ Steele. Hold on. How would you
For stereotype activation, also, soft A doesn't seem to have like any effect on like increasing the level of stereotyping that occurs.
So how would you measure like a slur not like reclaiming a slur not having any benefits, right? Like
you just simply like you survey people, right? You say like how often were you exposed to this word? Did it have like an effect on? And then we ask like questions either directly about mental health, or we ask questions that like would implicate bias, right? That would implicate stereotypization and other types of bias.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All right. So
Wait, can I call that like what is that 3-4 victories for tonight? 3-4 W's.
Victories.
I'm gonna call Fnatic running away a victory. Okay, I'm gonna call that a retreat.
Fair enough.
He's gonna disagree, but he retreated.
No, but
okay.
you're absolutely right on that one. Yeah, no, that's a win. Yeah, sure.
Spoodle also retreated. That's a win for me.
Okay.
I feel like I won this conversation, even though I'm a little bit sus about being nerdy and pulling up studies and shit. Like that's weird. But even though you agree with me, it's just I have like a knee-jerk reaction to be like anti-academic. But I want to call that a win too. And I feel like I won chat over, so that's 4. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
and I won the N-word pass, which I am going to use someday.
So I do want to ask this actually because I came in late on the conversation. When we're discussing the N-word specifically, are we talking about soft A or hard R? In terms
I don't care which.
Both.
Okay. Because I only came in like pretty late in the conversation, so I just wanted to ask. I don't know, because maybe I don't like the idea of the survey thing, because surveys only grasp like a very little amount of a community in a very specific time frame, because of course society changes and even on a monthly basis. But I mean, because I always grew up in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, so I didn't know the connotation of the N-word until I think I was in high school. And then when I moved, the area I moved to was a predominantly mixed area, mostly blacks and Hispanics. So I always ended up growing up with the idea that it was okay to say at least with the A connotation, but I was only using it, for example, like around my closest friends. I never used it outside of my little circle. And I think that's also the conversation that sometimes we miss about is, are you using it, with people, with the respect towards the group or the individual, versus just blatantly going out there and calling, somebody the N-word in a sense that you're basically creating a racist dialect in that situation.
And Nick, I talked about that earlier, about how you have an inner circle of friends that you use the word the soft A, and then it's like depends on your situation and the neighborhood, but then like hard R is not acceptable at all whatsoever. So I can totally agree that the variation of the two and it's separate. For me, one means it has no malicious intent at all, and the other one does. The other one completely it's just bad.
Because Spaniard,
I agree.
You
with
wanna?
Yeah.
I want to address what Nick
But
said
for
about
the-
survey.
the surveys,
Sorry.
yeah.
Oh, for
Mhm.
the survey, I don't think that survey went into the hood. I'm pretty sure they didn't, because if it went into the hood, then
It
I'm
explicitly
pretty sure.
selected for African American people who identify with an African heritage.
But is it
Phenomics,
specifically with,
I
like,
bet you any
hood
money
or,
that
like,
if you
rich
Phenomics,
area?
I bet you any money if you went on the south side of Chicago and you went in the hood and you said that out loud, you probably get dealt with. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's a very
I'm
different
pretty
thing
sure.
about whether it actually has a negative effect, right? People are going to be offended by
That's
it.
the negative effect. That's the emotional negative effect. That's why I said that survey did not go in the hood. That's I know it didn't. There's no
So-
way.
Well,
So-
because you also
You
know
know that?
Spaniard, like with Hispanic communities, they love
Yeah.
using the soft A connotation with
Yep.
that word. They
We do.
love using it.
I-
Yeah,
I know,
it's something that
I've-
is
I've
well
used it
known. So
a million, quadrillion times. That's why for me
Yeah.
it's not a big deal. But for other people's it is. So that's why I was saying that the inner circle, my friends, right? We would say it amongst each other. But if we went to some other different hood, I wouldn't use it because it's not my hood, and I don't want to offend anybody. So that's the way it is. But my intent is not. I have no malicious intent at all behind it. The soft A at all.
So in the current study, for example, the IDEO sample would not only match individuals who identify as Black Americans, but also match the representation of those individuals across age, gender, socioeconomic status, education, etc. in the United States. It's got like ways in which it tries to capture those, especially the socioeconomic status.
okay, yeah.
No, but
'cause
Spaniard
as
knows it
far as
doesn't do
what-
that. You don't understand. He knows it doesn't do that.
That's true. That's
Well,
true.
and that's-
Really quickly about, I agree over time. Views are going to change over time. I doubt that they're going to change significantly on an issue like this over a short period of time. This is a relatively recent study. It was 2017, right? 2021. Sorry. So it's incredibly recent, and I doubt that it's changed since like last year. And you said it only like captures specific regions. That's just not true. It's across the United States, and there's a confidence interval, right? So we only get the people that we surveyed, but within statistics we can extrapolate from like a small amount of data by saying like if the more people you get, the more we can assume that this is going to be the views of everyone. So if we say like if we have like 150 people and they all we grant that, then we can get like a confidence interval of some number that we can be like 95% confident or so that this is the views of people at large. And this study uses the typical 95% confidence interval that's like expected.
QB. What's honestly, it's been a while since we've had this discussion, right? And I've had to fight you on whatever nonsense comes out of your mouth. What's your opinion on people saying it again? Are you on Destiny's side basically?
I think it's totally fine for people to now. I think that both words are fine actually, just depending on the context. Like I'll give an example. I was on my Discord server a couple weeks ago. We're doing a town hall, a couple hundred people in the voice channel, and there was a guy who had popped up in the town hall. Because in the town hall, I let my users come up and ask questions and complain or whatever the fuck, right? And he came up and he wanted to ask why he wasn't a mod or some shit like that. So complain about mod shit. So I pulled up his mod logs and I found that he was regularly saying slurs on the server, which we don't actually allow, unfortunately, and just doing dumb shit, right? So I went through some of them with him publicly and tried to get him to justify them, and he started like dancing around the N-word, half saying it but then stopping, doing that. Oh, I'm going to say it. I'm not going to say it. So I just said it, right? And it was as Vosh would say, a strategic use of the N-word to take the wind out of his sails and make him look like an idiot, which it did, right? But I would say that it's probably not a good idea to say that word in, just like a casual conversation, right? Where everybody is like not going to freak out. Just like you probably wouldn't use the word cunt when speaking to your lady friends, right? Some women are very like averse to that word being used. So I don't know, but I think that the soft A N word is totally fine to use like in any context. Sometimes like on my server where there's like a lot of like white nationalists and shit sometimes. There are people who use it in place of like the slur N-word, so they will use it in a racially driven context. And that's pretty easy to spot. So we just say, hey, don't fucking do that, right? But typically when people are using that word, they're not using it that way, and I think it's totally fine.
So it. Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, Doobie. Is your only position that there are some contexts where you should say where it's okay to say the N-word, but generally it's still an issue?
Well, I think the soft A, within the United States, especially, I think there are a lot of
stuff with the hard R. To clarify, just the hard R.
Hard R. I mean, I think just like any word, there are some contexts where it's okay to say like a slur or a naughty word, right? But
you'd say in general the hard R is an issue.
What slur?
Well, the F slur, like the R slur, we did that with every other one.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some contexts in which it's okay to say it, right? Like I don't think it's that big a deal. It's not like a fucking Voldemort word, right? Like it's.
Yeah, what I'm asking is in general, Doobie, do you think in general the N-word with a hard R is an issue, just in general, not always, but just generally?
No, I think it's a word that's offensive to a lot of people, right? But I think if you're speaking about it in a context that isn't meant to offend anybody, isn't being used as like a racial slur or pointed at anybody, I think it's fine.
Do you think those are most contexts?
No, I think that typically when a word's used in a conversation, it's used in the racial like context, right? It's like a racial like insult.
Okay, so most uses of it, they're morally issuesome, even though it's not all uses of it, right?
Yeah, I'd assume that if somebody's going to, because I mean, the uses I'm imagining where somebody's saying it not in that context are somebody reading a book or something, or watching a movie and the guy says it and they repeat the line the guy says, or making an edgy joke to their friends or some shit like that.
Yeah, so it's not always wrong as your position. It's just usually wrong, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was asking when I said.
Yeah, I don't think it's okay for people to like racially attack people, right? Like,
okay.
Yeah, this is an issue that comes up in the classroom a lot. So, like for instance, I've got a book on a shelf. It would be on a shelf behind me, but it's everything's packed up because I've sort of moved places not long ago. But it's I can't even say the name of the book on air. It's called The N-Word of Narcissus, and it's a classical book. It's written in the 19th century. It's I recommend everybody read it. I teach Mark Twain, and the N-word shows up there, or Steinbeck it shows up, and I only recently ran into a problem. I used to have a talk, at the beginning of class each time saying, okay, when you're reading the book, it's important to, have the full impact of what you're reading. And so the kids, when they were reading, would say the N-word out loud. But then about maybe 15 years ago, I started noticing that, it was more like 10 years ago, I started noticing that kids were just refusing to do it, even in the context of reading the book. Which is interesting because the way we used to look at it is, let's say you're an actor in a movie and you're playing a racist, and the racist has to say the word. You're not going to not say it because, if you're acting it out, you're acting it out. So if you're in a school play, and something like that comes up, you need the shock value of that word in that dramatic act, right? So dramatic reading in an English class is kind of the same thing. But then we reached a point where, the thinking on that among students, among teenagers, had changed, and they just did not want to even say it dramatically, like in reading. And so I had to adapt, and we don't anymore, but we did for years.
It's probably inappropriate in like a high school play setting to like have kids saying the N-word out loud, especially like hard R.
I think the thinking now is it's a bit like needing to have a trigger warning or something like that. Like, not every kid in class is going to experience hearing that word the same way. And so there might be some harm in hearing it, even though there would be the same harm in watching a movie and hearing it as well. So,
more so than that,
there were a lot of conversations on campus about that.
Normalization of the hard R does seem to have like an effect on stereotyping of like.
Well, this was intended to be the opposite of normalization.
Stereotyping black people.
Yeah, this was intended to be the opposite of normalization. This was supposed to have shock value.
Well,
right?
if you're saying like this is something that is so normal that it should be said in a high school play, or that it should be read aloud in like a high school classroom, that's normalizing it.
Like
what I want to say is it not interesting that this is common in Americana?
Well, Yeah, I mean, well, it's common everywhere. I mean, if you were to watch, I mean, the book that I was telling you about was written in Britain. It wasn't written here. But then that word had a different meaning there, right? It referred to Irish people back, in a couple hundred years ago.
Well, it was supposed to be like a metaphor, right? It was white N-words. It was supposed to be like these people are these white people are like so bad that they're like N-words. It was still like a.
It might have started out that way, but it just because there wasn't a lot of racial diversity there, it became almost exclusively to mean that in certain areas of Great Britain. But yeah, I mean that's those because the argument against changing the policy was that you're sanitizing. And you're making it seem as if all of the issues that were Steinbeck was talking about, and Mark Twain and all these other people, that these issues really didn't exist, and it was really just kind of,
not really, right? They're still reading the word, still reading the history. You're just not having them say it out loud and break the social norm that.
So it has a less of a
stereotyping.
Shock. Right, but then it has a less of a shock value to it. It doesn't.
Sure, but like you're not sanitizing. You're sort of
skipping over.
They don't lose it. Maybe they don't have like as much of an emotional impact, but there's other emotional impacts, like an increase of stereotyping and a breaking of the social rule and the social norm that make it have worse effects.
Yeah, and ultimately that's the way we went. But that's not what I'm saying. Is it's something that gets discussed in teachers' lounges all over the country. Is whether or not you need to stay true to the work, or if you need to sort of whitewash it.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's different. Like having your classmates say this, especially because, like, what I found striking is what you said. Like, oh, the thinking is now.
Yes.
I think I don't know. It sounds like that'd be pretty messed up. Look, teachers, as you very well know, are not privy to all the interactions that students have between themselves. Right. And I've heard plenty of people. I didn't have this experience because I went to pretty diverse schools. But people, there are African Americans who go to these schools, especially ones that are majority white, and they hear this word a lot, right? They hear a lot from other people. They get attacked with it, and then within a class setting to say, "Oh no, like now I'm giving you permission to use this," right? Like, I think there's a lot of harm there for those kids, because this is a thing. This is a tool that people will use liberally against them when they're not even around. So like, I just don't like the idea of necessarily encouraging kids to say this word. Like I never get the fascination. I never get the fascination with saying all these words, right? So not just the N word, but these slurs in general. You
ought say the F slur.
Well, yeah, I don't say that either, right?
But you should.
I should. Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Normalizing I do think that for slurs like queer, right? Queer is a perfect example of this. If you can normalize a slur, it's good to do so.
But is it my job as a person, or should I be the one to do that as a person not part of the queer community?
Why would I want to normalize the N word?
Hold on.
I give Prime the F slur pass. I hereby give you the F slur pass.
So specifically,
it's on record.
Sorry, I didn't mean if you should normalize slurs. If you can make it so that they lose their negative connotations, right? If you can appropriate it. The F slur in particular seems to, like, by most of at least the younger queer community, seems to be used like pretty liberally in between us to like refer to each other, and it seems more unlike with the N word, where there's like this really strong negative connotation that comes with the hard R, that it's like it's still like culturally muddy. It seems like amongst queer people, the F slur is like fine to use, and it seems like a better way. We should move on to taking the F slur from like where we have the soft A N word now, to moving it towards like what we have how we use the word queer, right? Where everybody uses it and it no longer has like a negative connotation. We should try and make it so that it's not that case. That's never going to happen if we keep it within the queer community.
Okay, I think queer. I think it's an interesting example bringing up queer.
Bigger umbrella.
At one point, you had this awkward phase.
Slur is a pretty umbrella slur too, right? It's used to refer to trans people, gay people, all sorts of different queer people.
Yeah, at one point,
the N-word is for one people.
The N-word is for a larger group of people, for the record, right? Like, there's a lot more people who the N-word is applied to, Kai, than there is the people who the word queer applies to.
I can agree with that.
You're going to hit this weird uncanny valley, right, where you aren't sure whether you can say it because it still has some power. Like, we're past that with the word queer, but we're not there with the F slur, right? And so at what point do people outside the community start saying, okay, now it doesn't have enough power to harm, so now I'm going to start saying it?
Well, the only way we get it to not have enough power for the outgroup is if the outgroup starts saying it in like non-offensive ways and like non-derogatory ways. In the same way that like queer people already internally are using it in like non-derogatory ways. The only way to like move it to the point of queer is by getting everybody to use it in non-derogatory ways.
Yeah, but I think the older people who are a part of the LGBT don't use queer as like it's a cool word to say, because back in the days it was actually used to discriminate against gay men. So we don't. A lot of us, you know, it's just right? Like. Well, no, I mean, it was directly targeted towards gay men. It might have been universal for lesbian.
No, it was used towards like almost any. The word just meant weird, right? And when used in terms of sexuality, it was used towards gay men and gay women, right? It was used towards bisexuals. It was used towards transgender people.
Gay men.
It's interesting. I actually had a.
I'm saying, but the majority of the time, it was targeted towards gay men. Is what I'm saying.
I'm not quite sure that's true. I think it's really interesting. So
I'm kind of old enough to know about.
Yeah. No, I can tell you, queer was once a slur.
There you go.
Sure. I agree that it's a slur, right? I agree that it was once a slur. I'm telling you, gay men specifically were not the group that was targeted by it, right? It was targeting.
I said the majority target.
I'm just telling you, the majority of
that was the connotation.
Yeah. The original term was just used for like flamboyant people, not even like it eventually became to like be an insult against like gay people or whatever. But originally, it was just like flamboyant people.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting because like a few years ago, I had this conversation with a trans person on my server who was on the mod team, and at the time we were talking about banning the T slur for trans people, right? Because it wasn't banned on the server. We've been very resistant to like any speech regulation, but we decided, okay, you know, Discord's cracking down a lot. We need to ban this word, and she was really fucking upset for exactly this reason. She said that she used it, her friends used it, and she felt like if we kind of put it in the naughty word box and didn't allow people to say it, would basically add strength to it, to its use as a slur, as an insult, right? And we had like this huge conversation about it. So I think it's really interesting. The worst part is we don't even have a good alternative for the same thing, right? Like the closest second place to it is like saying LGBTQIA+, which is just like, what a fucking mouthful.
Yeah, queer works so much better.
Yeah.
For sure.
True.
One syllable.
I agree, but like
black works fine too.
But that's done. Like that transition has happened. I mean, you've got TV shows with the word, you know, queer eye. Queer eye.
Queer for the straight guy, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I think maybe that show had something to do with getting us over the finish line in terms of the outgroup being able to understand what was going on.
We can understand that.
Well, NWA didn't work.
Just because two things are a slur doesn't mean that these things are the same. Right? Like, okay, does anyone honestly believe that short of completely and totally dismantling racism, right? Dismantling systemic racism, dismantling these differences that individuals have to face, and like the oppression that goes along with it, short of that the N-word will ever become like some sort of like a neutral word to describe people of my phenotype?
It's absolutely possible. It's in the same way that queer, right? Like there's still a ton of queer phobia. It's still like I think it's like 60+% of people who think that trans people, or that the sex you're assigned at birth determines your gender. But still, we can use queer in that way. It seems like that words change over time, right?
But those two things aren't the same. This is why I'm asking this, because of the history. The history of the N-word, especially within this culture. In other cultures, that's a different story. But within
the history of the N-word is that it just like that was like the only word that we had for it at one point, right? We associated it with a pejorative because like Black people started saying like this is the word we would prefer to use, but like originally,
okay. Think about it in this way: how many years was it used to denote a Black person? Versus how many years has it been used as a positive?
I mean,
just really quickly, I need to.
Are you saying like within the Black community using it as like a like?
If you gotta go,
DB,
you gotta go. Thanks, DB, for sticking around.
Okay, I don't know what you mean by positive usage. Not so do you think the original usage was positive?
No.
So then you're not talking about the original usage.
The original usage of the word.
You're not answering my question at all. What are you talking about when you say positive usage?
The positive usage is the so-called A, the soft A.
I mean, I don't think that every soft A usage is positive, right?
Not necessarily. It's the most positive version of a racial slur I can come up with on hand.
I mean, sometimes it is used in a positive, right? Like sometimes it's used as like a way for like people to build community with each other.
Did I not just say that?
You just kind of you said the opposite.
Yeah.
It's the only positive usage of a racial slur I can come up with on hand.
You said it's the most positive, not the only.
It's the only.
Okay.
Why is that? Why is it the only positive usage?
I would love to know.
What if somebody says like I don't know, there's any other I mean like I'm not sure.
Why me a racial slur?
Can you give me a quick rundown on what are the rules on Twitch about slurs so I don't break any TOS? Like the E slur for the people who live in Canada, is that one okay? The one with E?
Eskimos?
Yeah, okay, I'm assuming that's fine then, yeah, because you said it. So like Eskimo is something that in some contexts is a slur, right? And Eskimo in other contexts is something that people are fine with. So it's a racial slur, but some contexts is just completely fine and acceptable, and in some contexts it's even suggested. The same is true for Native American people, right? The term Indian, right? American Indian is a term that at one point was used erroneously as a slur, and now it's something that a lot of the organizations surrounding Native American people will call themselves like the American Indian something, right? So like there are other racial slurs that the same qualifications exist for. They're just like Eskimo or like American Indian, right? Things like this.
Would you not call that indoctrination through common parlance?
That's how all words work.
No, it's not.
They're all intersubjective. Every single word is intersubjective.
I disagree.
What can you name an example of a word that isn't?
Outside of English would be the Chinese word tongzi. That's like a reclaimed slur in China.
What one word is not intersubjective? Like that's how words work.
Words are what they are usually. So
what is
water? Water is water.
Yeah, water is water because we all agree it's water, and we don't use the term agua, right?
It's
also black was originally a racial slur. Well, African American was like the term that like the African American liberation movement used, right? But black initially was like a slur used as against African Americans.
Well, it was the Latin word for black that denigrated into the N slur. They integrated into the soft A.
It was both the Latin word for black and the English word for black that were used as pejoratives, right?
Well, black in itself is not.
Well, but it was.
I disagree.
I mean, I can pull sources on this. This is just like true.
Okay, so before we go any farther, and we'll welcome our good friend Zonia here in a second. I'm very excited to have her. But before that, I just want to get this point across with Phenom. How do I say your name? I feel like I'm doing it wrong, and I do apologize.
It doesn't matter. Phenomics is like that's how I say it.
Okay, Phenomics. Okay. I don't think the N word is the same as many of those other words. I don't think like with the F slur or the queer, right? I don't think it's the same as any of that stuff.
I agree it's a different word. I just don't see how that doesn't mean that it can be reclaimed.
because of the history tied to it.
What specifically about the history?
And the current. You need me to tell you about slavery? Like,
well, I mean, there's slavery that was tied to black too, right?
Do you need me to tell you about chemical castration of people that the word queer applied to?
Let's not pretend that these things were used in the same
black
way.
And the N-word were used in the same way. It was only after, it was only in the in the 20th century, or sorry, the 19th century that the late 19th century that started to change.
These things are not the same, right? The application of the N-word and how that has been used throughout history, this specific word, right? Like, yes, you can use black in a pejorative term. Sure, I'm not going to fight you on that. I'm saying that just because
I'm saying that it was
pejorative doesn't mean that it has the same history tied to it, right? Not in,
in this case,
that
it doesn't mean that necessarily. It doesn't mean that necessarily, but in prior to the late 19th century, it is like an identical history. They're used interchangeably.
I don't believe that. You'll have to show me a documentation on that one. But
okay,
I'd love to see something about that. But the special place that this word has in our culture, right, is the one that is earned. The continued anti-black oppression that we see now today, right, and its roots all the way before this country was born, right, and filled with brutal oppression, right, of like the worst kinds, right. Like, I don't think people realize truly how deep that oppression goes. Like, if you think it stops with chains and whips, then you're surely mistaken. So to say that, and the fact that it's that anti-blackness is so embedded even within the structures of our government, and in the way that other
wait, so is anti-queerness. We have laws in the books right now that just explicitly discriminate against queer people.
In the way that other forms of bigotry just aren't, not to the same extent, right?
To a greater extent with queerness.
I
right now.
How is that?
Cite me one law in the book that explicitly discriminates against black people, and I'll cite you three that explicitly discriminate against queer people.
Brento, you're bleeding through.
Okay, so it's literally in the law. In almost every single state in the U.S. at one point, it was illegal to do the act of sodomy, right? In the case of laws right now, there are laws right now that prevent trans people from getting HRT, right?
And interracial marriage was also there too before the.
Yeah, I'm aware. I'm telling you that I'm telling you that in the case of the laws against queer people, they are still on the books, right? It's illegal now to have laws that explicitly discriminate against black people. The same is not true for queer.
Interracial marriage is illegal. Excuse me, that might have been. Sorry, before I say that, maybe it was like in. Was that the one that Mississippi got rid of in like 2000 or something?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, the interracial marriage still existed in law in a couple of states, and now it doesn't for any of them, right? Okay. The sodomy laws do exist in several states still.
Sure, but yes, I hear you that we have anti-queerness within our laws, but like the oppression against queer individuals, right? While certainly severe and something to be concerned over, obviously, right, is not the same, right, or to the severity that anti-black oppression has been, right? Like, we can agree on that at least.
Not the same. I don't think it's exactly the same, but I think they're pretty approximate. I think queerness is probably worse.
It's the anti-blackness has been simply, without a doubt, worse than anti-queerness.
Alan Turing was castrated for being a homosexual in like 1950.
Great. So they castrated black men. Right?
When
they literally, do I have to? Oh, well, I guess I do.
No, I agree that I agree it happened. I'm asking for the date.
Be careful about doing oppression Olympics here.
Yeah, I agree. It's a silly thing to do, but if Prime wants to do it, I want him to tell me what's the date.
No, let's not pussyfoot around.
I agree it happened, right? I'm asking you what's the date.
The date? What?
Yeah, the date. One of those happened in the lifetimes of people who are alive right now.
Okay, all right. Cool. We had in Chicago. In fucking Chicago, we had a police chief who would take black men into some fucking basement and torture them, sexually torture them, in all kinds of gruesome ways. And then he was
I agree. We're talking about laws on the books, Prime. You're moving over to something else. You said that black men were castrated by law. I'm telling you, gay men were castrated by law in the 1950s.
So, and I'm talking about an issue that happened later on, and then this dude was protected by the law. Like this dude was kept from prosecution, right? And several mayors.
Were there
right,
laws in the books
within
that said he couldn't be
living
prosecuted?
memory did that. Sorry, excuse me.
Were there laws in the books that said he couldn't be prosecuted, Prime?
Were there laws in the? That's the whole fucking point. That it's anti-blackness is embedded with the system. So no, you don't necessarily have to have a law in the book
Okay,
to protect
it being
them,
embedded in
because
the
law
system
won't
by
protect you
law
at
is a much
all.
stronger embedding.
So like,
So-
what is this nonsense, right? Like,
I sent
I
the-
don't know
I
what
sent
the
the
nonsense
link
you're
let me
doing
make sure.
is.
Hold on. Excuse me.
Like
excuse me.
queer people aren't
Sin,
significantly oppressed or
Sin. Are
something.
you?
So just
No, I
absurd.
need to. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your point, and maybe I'm getting upset over nothing. Or not upset.
Really
like,
quickly,
maybe I'm
I
getting
sent
No,
heated
hold
over
on. Let's try and
nothing.
talk. Let's
Maybe-
talk.
maybe-
Maybe,
Maybe I'm getting heated over nothing. So let me just kind of try to understand what you're saying, right? Are you actually saying that anti-queerness in this country, the history of anti-queerness, right, is as bad or worse than anti-blackness? So if you say no, then I guess there's no point in having this conversation.
right now or like historically? I think there was a time period in which it was much worse to be black than it was to be queer, and I think right now it's much worse to be queer than it is to be black.
What?
Sorry, are there any?
Nope.
Is there any
Nope.
state currently? Sorry, is there any state on the basis of you being black illegalizing you getting the health care that you need for the sake of like sickle cell anemia or something? Is there a single state doing that?
Why would it have to be the same thing?
Because there is for
to
trans
be-
people.
No, I get that. Obviously, thank you. Obviously,
I
thank you. We've
think-
talked about that on the show constantly. So, no, we don't have exactly that. However, we have a system that puts African Americans within a geographical location, right? And disinvests from that, right? And then over polices that, and then murders them, and then lets those individuals who did that off, right? And while there isn't the law that says they can't be well, actually.
Or trans
actually, there
people are a
is.
lot more likely to be killed than poor black people, right?
But, excuse me, hold on. Sorry, I'm still talking, right? Thank you.
Okay.
So, even though we have, we don't have a law necessarily that explicitly states that yes, cops can just murder black people. They just kind of do that any which way, right? They beat us and they bloody us and all that good stuff as well, right? So yes, sure, we don't have within the law, and it's quite a shame that trans individuals can't get the health care they need, but that doesn't mean that anti-blackness still isn't embedded in this country, literally, and our real estate.
Yeah, my position is not that there's not racism.
Great. So exactly, right? So I'm not going to say something idiotic, right? And and tie the statement to you that, well, if 10% of the community identifies as queer, right, that the value of the real estate in that neighborhood doesn't fall. So obviously these things aren't the same. That's a dumb fuck point, because I can understand.
Wait, but that just wouldn't be true. The issue is that wouldn't be empirically true, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's the point, right? If a bunch of trans people moved into a neighborhood, the house prices would fall.
Listen, what I'm saying
fall
is that,
drastically.
Shut up, please. Thank you. So what I'm saying, the point of what I'm saying is that I wouldn't tie that to you, right? I wouldn't say that, hey, because that this is a reality for African Americans and not a reality for queer people, which I obviously understand, which I'm obviously fucking saying right the fuck now, right? Just because these two things aren't the same, right, doesn't mean that takes away from the realities that queer individuals have to face. I wouldn't
wait,
say
but Prime, the issue is that
say,
it's just not true that they're not the same.
Oh my god,
That's the issue.
Talking? Holy shit! Like, do you not understand that when I'm talking, you don't have to be talking, right? You get that?
Prime, the issue is the argument you just made was disanalogous
God,
because in your case they're both. One case, one of those things is
Okay,
wrong.
Mute. All right, so you don't understand this, so I'm gonna have to do this for you, right? Like, you needed help. Don't worry, I will help you. You can't fucking understand to shut the fuck up when I'm fucking talking. You can't understand that? Don't worry, I'll help you, right? I'll do that for you. I can do that, all right? You're welcome. Shut the fuck up. Any which way. Fuck. What I'm saying, again, but test me again. Fuck. Anyway, what I'm saying is that I wouldn't tie those two things to you, right? Like, that's a nonsensical statement. Just because these two groups aren't facing the exact same thing, right? That doesn't mean that one group's oppression is not as great or as low as another, right? That's nonsense, right? I'm talking about the totality of those laws, totality of these institutions, right? That work against these individuals. And I'm not trying to take away anything from the queer struggle. Absolutely not, right? We stand up for our queer brothers and sisters, but it's simply a historical fact. African Americans have had to deal with much more, right? It's a historical fact that within the laws of this country and the brutality that has been expressed on Black bodies, right, is simply more, right? Again, doesn't mean that our queer brothers and sisters haven't faced a lot and don't have a hard struggle at this moment. And yes, things are actually getting worse for them at this moment. But the totality of history, right? And this is why I don't separate from now from previously, because history creates the present. So that's why I wouldn't even make a separate like, oh well, in the past things were better or not. All of these things lead up to the present right now. Okay, I'll mute you.
Really quickly, I sent a source in chat on the Black being used as a slur. In fact, this source specifically says that according to Ethel Walker, who's like a professor, that the word Black actually had more negative connotation than the like negro, the O, soft O. I don't know what you want to call that specific word. It had like a more negative connotation at one point.
I actually have to take off.
Show me the queer lynchings, and I'll shut the fuck up.
Good talking to you guys.
Seriously, the queer lynchings. Today, trans women are like killed en masse. A poor trans person is much more likely to be murdered than a poor Black person.
Yeah, but en masse.
May I?
What?
Yes, en masse.
Not en masse.
En masse.
No. We like
Hold
the
on.
statistics
Shut
of
that mouth.
the death of trans individuals, right, which is shocking and absolutely needs to be addressed, right, is not en masse, right? Like unless, you have like a slaughter of trans individuals. Maybe I missed it. That might be a possibility.
Please show
slaughter
me.
of trans individuals.
I mean, yeah, this is like trans. I'm pretty sure trans women are like the most likely demographic to be killed like in the world right now. But I can like find the specifics on that.
I'm not sure about that statement, but okay, I'll leave that alone. Zonia, you can. Oh, so before you go, Zonia, let's let Synth respond.
Okay, some common ground here. Black trans
Can I go ahead and
are
respond?
at the bottom of that pile.
Yeah, I agree that if you have more than one reason you're oppressed, you're more likely to be even more oppressed, right? But what we're comparing is queerness to Blackness, not queerness and Blackness in combination to Blackness alone and queerness alone, right? So
I'm just trying to find common ground.
I agree. Yeah, it's there's definitely oppression of both groups, and we have to be everyone on the panel agrees with that. The issue that I take is with Prime saying that it's worse to be Black than to be trans, right? That's the issue I take. In the case of
the violence level difference.
In the case of hold on. Well, maybe Prime isn't saying that, but Kai just said that there was like
I'm for sure saying it.
Yeah, so Kai, that's just insane. If you want to look at per police encounter, right, death rates of like trans people and death rates of Black people, there's a much higher rate of death per police encounter of trans people, right? There's a trans panic defense. There is not a Black panic defense, right? There in the case of the argument that Prime gave, you gave the analogy of like home prices going down when Black people move into a neighborhood. I agree this happens, and I agree it's repulsive that it happens, but it also happens for trans people. If trans people move into a neighborhood en masse, your home prices also go down.
There is a Black panic defense, and it's called walking while Black.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
For the class issues, trans people, if you like, Black people are going to be their homes are going to be in worse neighborhoods. Trans people make up 57% of the homeless population.
So what trans person was killed while eating?
Or sorry, 57% of trans people.
I'd like to kind of bring up here, because this is a very tricky topic. First of all, let me state that, as in, I can't even take myself seriously here, as in Irish trans autistic dyslexic survivor.
Wow.
I'm fucking around. But this whole situation is a very difficult thing to do when you're comparing marginalized groups of people based along lines of rate of oppression. It's very messy, and it creates a big problem, because like you can say that you have, as a Black person, we all know, like, driving while Black, walking while Black, this is something that's a thing. You're very likely, or much more likely, to be pulled over by cops because of the fact that you are Black. You're much more likely to be harassed by people or feel threatened by, or like people will feel threatened by you. These are common
Do you think
things.
people don't feel
Now,
threatened by trans people? The most common talking
now-
point is that trans people are like groomers, that they're like sexual offenders, that them coming into your bathrooms, they're gonna offend, that they're gonna like rape you. Basically, that's the implication.
Even in San Francisco, which is a very queer friendly city, people, this is something you hear stories about. You still hear stories about people locking their doors when there's a black person, walking by their car or crossing to the other side of the street.
If we want to compare, like, if we want to take the most queer friendly city, I think it would be more fair to take like the most queer friendly city and the most black friendly city and compare them, right?
And
by
the way, stop interrupting me and give me a few minutes to finish up my point. All right, thanks. So
right,
now what you can do is you can then also say that when a black person gets pulled over, and likely when a trans person gets pulled over, both of them have a high risk of having an escalation of violence done against them by the police, arrested, maybe severely hurt, right? So this is something that we can say we both have to deal with. So what we can do is we can take individual types of oppressions that we face, and we can talk about those, and instead of comparing them against each other to say who is dealing with more oppression, we can say, hey, here are things that we both suffer from. And we both admit that there are other things that the other marginalized group suffers from that we don't, and vice versa. There's no reason to weigh the two against each other and try and decide which one is more oppressed. What's more important is finding that common ground and where we can address it and where we can unite together and address it. Because as soon as you start trying to weigh and compare, you start creating a big problem, because inevitably one of the other groups is going to be like, hey, wait a minute here. You don't understand the shit that I go through on a daily basis and that my friends, my family have to go through on a daily basis, and you're dismissing that. And that's how it's going to feel. And that's how it's going to look.
Sonia, you missed the context.
I disagree with you here, right? Because the problem is that, addressing these, these issues, isn't treated equally. So, like, the law doesn't deal with anti-blackness equally as it does with others, right?
That doesn't address the point. She's acknowledging that they're not treated differently.
Don't worry about what I'm saying, right? Because I'm saying it, so you don't have to worry about what I'm saying. I'm talking to Sonia. Thank you, right? So, it doesn't it doesn't address these things equally. So I hear you when you're saying that we should be finding common ground, and in general, that's what we try to do here, right? Like. Is that, like, I'd rather have common ground with individuals, but like I think this is part of it. It's just acknowledging the situation that some people, yes, have privilege, right? I have some privilege, obviously, being a cis individual, right? A cis male. I have a certain privilege, but like understanding that, like, how these things are responded to by society, by the general public. No, I think it's understandable to say that some things are worse, right? And they need special treatment. And actually, like, though we support each other in terms of like wanting each individual movement to advance, right? We can also see that the roadblocks that some movements face are simply greater and more numerous than others. So we can call it like Pressure Olympics or anything, but I think having a proper accounting of history, right, and of the present, right, having being able to look at it with clear eyes, like we can't make progress unless we do that as well.
So there are some things. Is where we're talking.
I wanted to get in really fast.
Specifically, racial slurs.
I wanted to get in really fast.
I'm not sure if Phenomics has got what you were saying. Did you finish your point?
So yeah, the point was that the reason we were comparing the two, right, and this is relevant, is because we were comparing like the history of Black racial slurs versus the history of transracial slurs, and we were saying that that there is reason to believe that that these are comparable enough that you can that we can do similar things to with queer racial with queer slurs versus racial slurs. And very specifically to address your point about police escalation of violence, it seems like Black people are way more likely to be in an incident where a police officer might use escalation of violence, which is systemic racism, but specifically police escalation of violence doesn't seem to be any worse for Black people or white people, based on the data we have.
I see. So it kind of derailed when trying to say, no, reclaiming the N-word doesn't have the same weight as reclaiming like a queer-related slur. So
since we have that disagreement, it is justified to go into the differences of like Black and queer oppression, right?
Yeah, here's something I would ask the panel. Would you all agree that the more that you try to make a word forbidden, the more power it has over you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's. I think everybody can agree on that. I think.
Now,
Stan,
I wouldn't like advocate for people going around and just throwing the N-word around. But I think that it needs to be recognized that the more that we try to make a word off limits, the more power that word has over us. How you actually take that and turn it into something with application is, I don't really know. Like, I'm somebody who I don't mind using the T slur. And I'm saying it here because we're on Twitch, right? I'm saying T slur instead of the actual word on here because I'm on Twitch. I'm an advocate for it. It also has its origins not so much in a word that was weaponized against us. It was actually used within our community, but it got kind of hijacked by places like 4chan in the early 2000s and has since become off limits even for trans people to use. And the way I see it, the more off limits something is, the more power it has against you, over you. So I use it because it's something that I can own and our community can own and sort of normalize it. And I honestly don't care at all if a non-trans person uses it. Even if they use it disparagingly against me, I don't really care. Because the more that I do care, the more that word has power over me again. So that's sort of how I look. That's my ethos around it. I don't know how if you agree with that.
Before we move on, I'm chomping at the bit to be able to address something that was said way earlier. Zonia, you pulled up the Veil of Darkness study, or you alluded to the Veil of Darkness study, right?
Yeah.
But they're like, so it's important to note where the actual oppression lies, right? And it lies in the fact that there was like the Black people were a separate class of people, and so they're like much lower income on average now. The Veil of Darkness study has serious methodological flaws. The only 10% of the variability is accounted at all by officer level factors, and racial disproportionality disappears entirely among Black women versus white women, right? With the Veil of Darkness thing. So that's a really hardcore, methodologically flawed study to use for the point you're trying to prove there. That's all I wanted to say.
I have seen that, but we also still have a lot more incidents of on foot, like pedestrian interactions with police.
It's more interactions, right? That's what happens. There's a higher rate of interactions.
And also just not so much like, what was the study? This is one from like around 2015 or so, I think it was, where it was talking about they were that Black men in particular are observed by others as being a few years older than they actually are, as well as seeming more aggressive from people's perspective. And this is a study that was done among cops, but then they also did a study among non-police officers as well. And that was something that I remember being a big deal, is that probably one of the biggest things in the case of like minors being treated like aggressively as kids and being arrested, where they would often let someone off normally under most circumstances. They assessed the boy, who would be a young male, as being much older than he actually is. So it's this thing, this cultural thing that has sort of developed where people, not just police, but people in general, perceive black men as being a few years older than they are, and also as looking more aggressive than they actually are. Like, so
yeah, I don't think anybody on the panel would say that there's not racial discrimination against black people. My point was the veil of darkness study is really bad. The veil of darkness study is really bad.
I used the wrong one. I shouldn't have used that one. I agree that one is flawed. But
also, since we're talking about like the interactions, right? The number of interactions is going to have a lot to do with the socioeconomic status of black people, and I think it's again important to recognize that 63% of transgender adults are unsheltered, largely because they're like, as teenagers or as young adults, they're like kicked out by their parents, and they lose those ties that allow them to like build up wealth and income with their family.
Yeah, there are other factors in there that are being overlooked, though. Also, like intergenerational wealth. Also, even if you end up kicked out of your home and homeless, still provides you access to other things as you were growing up, giving you other advantages, right?
Sure, but they're still 63% homeless, right? And like the income level of trans people, I guess we can do a comparison. I guarantee you it's lower. Trans people it's more in more states. It's legal to fire somebody for being trans than to fire them for being black. Or that was true only a few years ago.
I would also say that we don't have like 150 years of systemic, issues built up around. No, not really, because there wasn't enough. We weren't present enough in our society.
We had to be hidden, right, because of the systemic discrimination.
And you could hide.
That wouldn't be systemic discrimination.
But you could easily hide it because of your skin color.
I wouldn't say easily, but like.
Well, I mean, yeah.
But hide it and instead kill ourselves.
The reason why.
Yeah, it wouldn't be by definition systemic.
This is being. Hold on a second. I don't know why this conversation ended up focusing on trans individuals. So that when the statement that I was talking about was specifically talking about queer in general, and not just focus on trans individuals. But that's fine, whatever, right? But yeah, like there is no option to hiding black skin. That's not a thing, right? And
that was my point.
We can understand the mental stress that it puts on our trans brothers to hide their desires, right, and their gender identity, and it's a terrible thing.
The preference of trans people is to hide their original gender, right?
However, right, you cannot hide being black, right? Like you don't get pulled over. Well, I guess maybe if you're quote unquote visibly trans, I don't know. But I don't know if there's any statistics on that. But you don't get pulled over for being gay, right? Like you don't get, that's not a thing. But you do get pulled over constantly for being black. You have a system of oppression built around the skin color, a thing that is you can't integrate that, right? You can't disguise that. Like it's something you wear out and proud. So like this is.
So if 63% of like 63% of trans people are homeless, right? It's basically impossible to be homeless and have an income. With 63% of trans people being, I mean, it's very difficult to be homeless and have an income.
Hold on, let me jump in. I haven't talked too much. Phenomics, the 63% like homeless stat on transgender adults, I don't think that's correct.
I can send you a source.
Yeah, I did Google it myself. The only source that I found also says that 49% of cisgender adults are homeless. Like, I think what they mean is, like, of homeless people, 63% of those homeless people are not sheltered. And that 63% is compared to 49% for cisgender adults. So the number, I don't really, like, care about the point about any of that, but I was just looking into it, and like I don't think the numbers quite mean what you think they mean there.
I mean, also, okay, like, I can.
Wait, yeah, that's not the source you're talking about. Is the number of people who while experiencing homelessness are unsheltered. TK,
exactly.
That's not the one that Phoenix is citing.
And that's no.
That's just an unrelated statistic. It's not.
Okay.
Not analogous.
That's fine. That's why I'm asking for like the source.
Yeah.
Like I would consider it lucky, I guess, if it was 63% of transgender people were homeless, and also, so I assume that it was referring to this stat.
The earlier number I used was 57. I think that I pulled up that source and I used the like slightly higher number. I'll show you the 57 number, but they're like nearly identical, right?
Sounds good. So I wanted to go off of what Prime was saying. If Phenomics, if you were in a car, I was in a car, and Prime was in a car, 8 o'clock at night in an inner city, we're cruising down the street. Majority of the time, a cop is likely Prime is going to get pulled over first. I'm going to get pulled over second. You ain't even going to get pulled over.
That's ridiculous.
That's reality. That is reality.
No, it's not reality.
Reality because the cop.
Can you stop?
Wait a minute. Time out.
Okay, go ahead. I didn't know you had a second point.
A cop can't see in the dark at 8 o'clock at night. They are not looking at if you're trans, LGBT, A+, etc. They're looking at the skin color. They see a brown Hispanic in a car, and they see a black man in a car. That's the first things they see.
If you're visibly trans,
hold on. This is just that you're alluding to the Veil of Darkness study. We addressed this earlier. You're like rewinding backwards in the conversation. We already addressed why the Veil of Darkness study is not sufficient for proving.
I don't know about no freaking study. I'm telling you the reality of me being on the street, bro. I don't. You know what? These studies that all three of you are trying to mention, I don't know how much of the reality is like when we're out on the street and we're out and about and we're saying this at night. We're all three in separate cars. I'm telling you right now, bro, this is a fact. A cop is not looking at Phenom because of the sexuality or the gender. They're looking at Prime and me of our skin color. That's a fact.
You keep saying it's a fact,
I don't know about surveys. That's a fact, yes, because I've been pulled over being brown and been Hispanic. All right, bro?
You've been pulled over before?
I've been pulled over for being brown and driving a car with my other Hispanics in the car, bro. Because it never happened to you. Because you don't know what that is. You don't know that feeling about it. You have no idea what it is.
Anecdote is anecdote. We have data that disagrees with you.
I have data that disagrees because I'm a bookworm.
You're just mad.
But you also don't know.
You also study we have.
But you also can't change your skin color either. But you can't change your skin color to my color or Prime's color.
I can't change my skin color.
You can't.
What's your point?
The frick, man? You're trying to compare.
What is your point?
You're trying to compare. You are trying to compare the amount of discrimination, hatred towards Hispanic plus Black to LGBT. Are you insane? There's no comparison.
Yes, there is. Are you insane? You have no counter argument. You've given me nothing. You just keep saying it's obvious and it's real life.
I think
you haven't. The LGBT it's not even.
These are the dumbest arguments I've ever heard. These are the dumbest arguments I've ever heard in my life.
I think.
Anyways, like I was saying, right? So, like I was saying, right?
Finish your point.
The Hispanic, right? Thanks. The Hispanics and the Blacks have, throughout 350 to 400 years of discrimination, hate, murder, rape, etc. All of that. 400 years, right? And then Prime was saying something about in the past 150 years that the LGBT is now just starting to see any of these at all, right? I think was it you, Prime?
That is not what Prime is saying. No, the fuck it isn't.
It was one of the two.
I hope to God that's not what Prime is saying. Yeah, that's not what
somebody said about 150 years, right?
No, I didn't say 150 years. That was Zonia brought that up, but she talked about systemic racism in terms of anti-blackness.
Right.
But
it was worse. I think it was worse. It's been 400 years to 350 to 400 years of discrimination, hate towards Hispanics and Blacks in the United States, constantly in public eye, constantly, like murder, rape, nooses.
Trans women have never been murdered, raped, or
stealing people's lands. Hispanics' lands is gone. Like, did you have any land? Did LGBT have any land?
The LGBT is too busy being homeless to have land. Sorry.
You didn't have no freaking land. Come on, man. Oh my lord.
I think where we can kind of break bread here is that for us in the queer community, there wasn't really a there wasn't really a significant system of oppression so much for us, but now there is, right? So whereas with people of color, particularly Black and Latino people here in the U.S., there was hundreds of years of systems built up that oppressed them. Nowadays, what we're having is that those systems are being actively put into place in red and purple states with what are we up to? We're at over like
600 plus laws or something.
It's like over, I know it was over 400 anti-LGBTQ bills across red and purple states that have been cropping up. And so there is now a conscious effort to build a system of oppression for the LGBTQ community, particularly the trans community right now. And that's a newer phenomenon, because now we're in the public eye more, and we're in the public discourse. And so there are a bunch of reactionaries who are trying to find ways to legislate us out of existence. And that's where this new system of oppression is coming in. This is where we're starting to face systemic oppression in real
Sonia,
time.
to be clear, that's not new though, right? Like there have been attempts to legislate people who are like gay and trans out of existence since forever, right? Sodomy laws are fucking ancient at this point.
Not on it was
like it exists in the fucking Old Testament.
Yeah, but we didn't have enough visibility for them to create a comprehensive system,
we had to be in hiding because of the level of discrimination, right? The level of discrimination was you will be killed if you're found, or you'll go to jail.
Usually castrated if you're or a man. You'd often
in the 50s it was castration, right? But before that it was just death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but it wasn't as comprehensive a system, and that's a new thing. So
what do you mean?
You don't need like a comprehensive, like the system for Black people was pretty simple at first too, right? It was your slaves. The system gets more complicated as we fight for our rights.
Was it so simple? I don't agree that it was.
Well, after emancipation, there was a concerted effort to legislate Black people into a number of different things, either complete economic destitution, indentured servitude, segregation, all those things. So that's when the comprehensive systemic oppression started becoming.
No, I disagree with you there. I disagree. No, like there's nothing simple about American chattel slavery. Slavery.
Yeah, I didn't say it was simple.
I know you did.
It wasn't simple, but the system was simple. The laws were simple, right?
No, I don't know.
There were less laws
I'm
than
not sure
number, right?
I'm not sure if this is a point worth arguing.
But I think what we're trying to do, because we're trying to sort of define what is going on now, right? Which is now there's a concerted effort by reactionaries to legislate us out of existence.
Sorry. What I'm trying to do now is end the stream. Like it's almost 9 hours, and I
sure.
gotta go. So everyone, guys, if you enjoyed this content, hit the follow button. Make sure to click on, so you know I'm going live.
9 hours
all the time. Tomorrow we are going to be doing a stream with Destiny on YouTube. Right, we're going to be a panel type thing. It's gonna be fun. So check us out. If you're not a part of our YouTube, hit us up on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Watch us there, or throw your miss off because we can't do this on Twitch. Okay, so hit us up on all our social media, and we will.